The Journey to Next Door. A Tale of Two Bears by Angelee Sailor Anderson. In a tiny bedroom in a tiny cottage in Cornwall by the sea, there lived two tiny bears dressed in blue. The she-bear, who was exactly 2 5/8 inches tall, was called Blueberry. Her gold-brown head was not much bigger than one of the fruits for which she was named. The he-bear, who was the same height, though he claimed to be slightly taller, 2 11/16, was called Berry Bud, after the sailor Billy Budd in the Herman Melville story. Berry Bud was a sailor too, or at least he thought he was, and told enough sea dog's yarns to prove it. He wore a navy blue sailor suit with a big white collar and a red tie at the neck, and on his head was a blue beret with a red pompon. Blueberry's breezy blue dress had white polka dots on it and a white ribbon trailing down the back, and she had a red bow fastened, somehow, to the fur between her ears. She had big black eyes for a bear her size, and her face had a wistful expression on it as if she was not quite sure what a bear was expected to do. Berry Bud's expression was more masterful, though if you looked closely, you could not help noticing that it was slightly confused. The bears were as sweet and good as they were small, and their mistress cared for them as lovingly as if they were human children. Blueberry and Berry Bud lived in a tiny nursery which had been made for them by their grandmamma, their mistress's mother. The nursery had a cradle for two decorated with white lace, red ribbons, and pearls, and there was a red slide and a red unicorn on wheels for the bears to play on. There was a trellis covered with red and white silk roses, and over the top of it the nursery had a glass dome. This dome was not there to keep the bears prisoner, but to protect them. It was in fact a magical dome, for it made the nursery cool in the summer and warm in the winter, kept it light when the bears wanted to play, and dark when they wanted to sleep, and shielded them from creepy, scary noises and from nightmares. When their mistress tucked them into their cradle at night with their little toy teddy bear between them, not a real bear like us, they were as perfectly snug and content as two bears could be. Well, almost perfectly. These bears, you see, had one quality which might have got them into trouble if they had not been so good. The quality was a little like curiosity, and a little like wanderlust, and a little like something else they did not know the name of, but which actually made them feel tingly all over in a very joyful sort of way. The one thing these bears longed for and had never had was an adventure. They had never been outside of their mistress's thatch-roofed cottage, except once when they were first brought home from the bear shop. They had been so new then that they could not remember much about it. It had been night-time, and they had a far-away, wonderful memory of the sky glorious with stars, and a roaring of the sea more kingly than any lion's. They could smell the sea sometimes when their mistress left the windows open, for the magical dome did not shield nice things like the salty sea scent from their little nostrils. Being good, the bears did not want to do anything to worry their mistress or to disobey her, but they did want very, very much to see the stars again, and to hear the sea roar, and to visit their dozen bear cousins who lived next door. In their grandmamma's cottage next door, there lived 12 tiny bears who had been born in the same shop. There was a pair of he and she bear twins dressed just like them in blue, and 10 more dressed in marvelous ways they could not imagine. Berry and Blueberry wanted to make friends with these cousins, and had tried to let their mistress know this, but being busy with many things, as mistresses are, she had not got the hint. Every day the bears took turns playing on their unicorn and slide, and every night they slept nightmareless and sweet dreamful in their cradle, and they were very, very happy. But oh, the sea! But oh, the stars! But oh, next door! And then one summer night, in summer, the mistress tucked the bears into their cradle, and they lay down to sleep on their lavender-scented bed. The tucking in and the lying down happened every night, but there was something that happened in between which made this night different. The mistress had left the magical dome off of the nursery. The bears lay quietly in their cradle until they could tell by their mistress's breathing that she was dreaming too deeply to be disturbed by bear whispers. Then Blueberry said, "Berry Bud, I don't think I want to go to sleep tonight." "Nor I, Blueberry matey," Berry answered. He was always mixing sea things into his talk, and Blueberry sometimes suspected that he did not know what they meant. "Let's raise the anchor and hoist t'gallants, and turn our frigate's prow toward foreign shores. There's a fair sou'wester blowing, and nothing to stop us from sailing away-o." I don't know what you're saying, Berry, said Blueberry. I meant that I'm afraid of going to sleep. What if we have nightmares? We can't have nightmares when we're standing the night at the helm. We're going on an adventure, Blueberry. A voyage of conquest to the globe's corners and the earth's ends. We're going next door. Next door, Blueberry repeated in awe. Berry Bud, can we? To such tiny bears as they were, next door seemed as distant and dreadfully mysterious as deepest, darkest Africa. Maybe even more dreadful than that, for their mistress had read to them about darkest Africa in books, but they knew nothing at all about next door, except the grandmamma and the cousins. How can we, Berry Bud? Trust me, Blueberry. With the 4 winds in my sails, I have navigated the waters of all 7 seas, and have crossed sabres with brigands whose ships flew the Jolly Roger, and have chased whales by starlight on the line, and have smoked the pipe of peace with the strange dark bears of the islands of... I believe you, Berry, I think, said Blueberry doubtfully. But next door isn't over the sea, is it? I'm sure it's not under it. Besides, I don't know if she, here the bear pointed to her sleeping mistress, would like us to go so far away without permission. Maybe we could just have an adventure in the house. The house, snorted Berry. An adventure for lily-livered landlubbers. It will be a good adventure, Berry, you'll see. Berry Bud grumbled, but he gave in. The bears got out of their cradle without making any noise, and Berry helped Blueberry to climb down the maple-wood dresser on which the nursery sat, being careful not to rattle the drawers. They tiptoed across the giant bear rug, not a real bear, and squeezed through the open crack their mistress had left in the bedroom door, and they had their adventure in the house. They shinnied up the library shelves and read all the titles on the book covers. They went jumping from bottle to bottle on their mistress's spice rack, and quit because it was such a long way down from poultry seasoning to white pepper. They danced on the piano keys, and once Berry Bud, while doing the sailor's hornpipe, actually stamped so hard on middle C that it plunked, and he had to be shushed by Blueberry. They swung from the vines of the hanging plants and from the pendulum of the old clock. They went exploring between the sofa cushions for coins and crumbs. They tried, unsuccessfully, to rock in their mistress's rocking chair. They had a scare when they encountered a brontosaurus named Angelee, which their mistress had made out of tin foil. Berry Bud gave Blueberry a ride in a china teacup by running round and round the saucer while pushing the cup handle. Blueberry emerged from the cup feeling rather sick. The bears scaled their mistress's desk, played with the pencils and paper clips, and studiously investigated the 2 open books on the desktop. One was an atlas, open to a map of the South Seas. Berry Bud strode from port to port across it with his jaunty little sea swagger, telling Blueberry of his experiences on Puka Puka and Rarotonga. The other book was a huge Bible with capitals illuminated in blue and green and gold at the beginning of each chapter. Berry perused the first chapter of Genesis. What does it say? Blueberry asked solemnly. In the beginning, read Berry, God made the heavens and the bears. Ooh, breathed Blueberry. Read some more. And God said, Let there be bears, and there was bears, read Berry Bud. Were bears, Blueberry corrected. Read more, Berry. Berry wriggled his nose between the pages of Isaiah the prophet. The glory of the Lord shall be thy bear guard. He peeked at the Psalms. Thou art more glorious and excellent than the mountains of bears. Are you sure you're reading that right? Berry asked Blueberry skeptically. Does it really say all those things about bears? Maybe you should try reading out of the New Testament instead. Berry turned to the Gospels and read, Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you. I think it's time for us to go back to bed now, Berry Bud, Blueberry interrupted. But at that moment, through the library's open window came a heavenly wind and the smell of the sea. And the wind and the smell were like the voice of a mystical, sweet someone beckoning to the bears. It was a beautiful voice, and they knew without knowing how that it was good. Come shake the sea's hand and kiss the shining faces of the stars, sang the voice. Come play with your cousins. Come next door. And the voice was so beautiful that Berry Bud lost all his brash boldness and bowed his head in wonder. And it was so good that Blueberry no longer felt afraid. "Let's go where the voice calls us, Berry Bud," she said. "It will be all right. It will be very all right. The mistress won't mind. Let's go next door." As if it understood her words and approved, the library curtain billowed suddenly into Blueberry's reach. She caught hold of it and swung on to the window sill, and Berry Bud came after her. Together they looked out upon the cottage garden and the night. The evening sky above them was as rich and deep as the purple velvet of a king's royal cloak, and the stars sparkled with every color in their mistress's crayon box. The bears continued to watch the stars in fascination as they clambered down the bean trellis which stood just outside the window. It is appropriate that it was by means of a beanstalk that the bears began their adventure. Not only is there the very important precedent of Jack in the fairy tale, but it is well known that beans and bears have a special relationship. This is natural, since the difference between them is only the difference between an N and an R. Since they were looking up and not down where they were going, Berry and Blueberry arrived at the ground with a bit of a bump. When they had recovered from it, they looked around with wide eyes. The house's garden was so enormous by miniature bear measurements that a trip to the next flower pot was like an expedition to another country. As for next door, it was continents away, as remote as the emerald rainbow around the throne of God. "Do you know where it is, Berry?" whispered Blueberry, beginning to be frightened again. "If we bear 15 degrees to starboard, the shores of next door should rise up to meet us dead ahead," answered Berry Bud with confidence, perhaps with more confidence than he ought to have answered, seeing as how he had never been there. The bears set out in the direction Berry had indicated. They trekked through the rhubarb patch, then through a long row of asparagus whose gigantic ferns formed lacy veils between them and the stars. They tramped through groves of prickly poppies and evening primroses, and plowed through the thickets of honeysuckles, hollyhocks, and daffodowndillies. They braved the dangers of the foxglove forest and the tiger-lily jungle. They encountered a flower called a blue sailor, which was so tall that when Berry Bud tried to salute it, he tripped over backwards and landed on his bare behind. They passed through a topiary where the bushes were shaped like bears. They walked under a water-spout and were drenched with leftover drippings from the afternoon's rain. In the center of the garden the bears came upon an astrolabe. Berry Bud began to explain the nautical uses of the instrument to Blueberry, but left off when he became even more confused than she was. They were confronted by a dragonfly, which Berry was ready to chivalrously slay, until it turned out to be mortally afraid of bears who were exactly 2 5/8 inches tall. They happened on a wonderfully fuzzy caterpillar, which shyly consented to let Blueberry pet it. They met a pillbug who rolled itself into a ball on the first sight of them, and would not unroll however long they knocked. They journeyed on to the music of their mistress's wind chimes, and to the fragrances of night jasmine, golden thyme, and English lavender mingling with the seas. They journeyed on, bearing always 15 degrees to starboard, according to Berry Bud's instructions. They wriggled through a yew hedge, stumbled out of it all dusty and scratched, and realized that they were utterly, awfully lost. Blueberry tried hard to be brave, but she could not completely disguise her sniffles. "The night air is giving me a stuffy nose, Berry," she explained. Berry Bud understood. It was giving him one, too, and the salty pool in the corner of his right eye was not from the sea spray. He was about to swallow his pride and admit that he had led her astray, when he saw spreading before them a lily pond, its surface reflecting the moonlight between floating flowers. The bears trotted forward to the beach of the backyard ocean. "4 bells and all's well," Berry bragged. "I told you I'd steer us to next door, right and true. Stow your sea gear, Blueberry matey, and get on board." He helped Blueberry onto a lily pad, procured a sturdy twig, and began to paddle with it to the further shore of the pond. True, it was not a very nice ship. There were no riggings and no cross trees for him to climb onto, and a paddle is vastly inferior to a tiller. But Berry put a captainly face on it, and crooned a halyard shanty, whose chorus said something about blowing the bear down. He had just begun a second shanty about how whiskey is the life of a bear, when a neighboring lily pad had jostled against theirs with much more force than is usual for an uninhabited vessel. Blueberry looked over at the offending pad and screamed. Upon it sat the most monstrous creature the bears could imagine. Remember, they had never had a nightmare. The creature was, to be precise, a frog, and a rather friendly one, but of course the bears had no way of knowing this. They did not understand frog language, and the great booming ribbits and needips the frog emitted in greeting made it even more terrifying to hear than to behold. Berry-Bud began frantically to paddle in the opposite direction. He wished that he had a pair of jackboots with pistols tucked into them, such as real sailors wore, or a knife on a lanyard around his neck, or a musket, or a cannon, or something sharper than a twig to swashbuckle with. Blueberry kept asking him questions to keep herself from panicking. "What is it, Berry? Is it a sea serpent? Or a kraken? Or a shark? Or a whale? Or a mermaid or man? Or a sweet siren? Or a—" Berry-Bud did not reply, but only paddled and paddled. It seemed to him that their little frigate was getting nowhere. He had forgotten, you see, or perhaps he had never known, that the lily pad was attached to the bottom of the pond by a stalk. The stalk had now stretched to its full length, and it held the bear's vessel as fast as any anchor. Berry was just beginning to wonder which of them the monster would swallow first, when the frog, seeing a tantalizing insect, buzzed past, put out its sticky tongue, and downed the insect in one quick gulp. Then, with a satisfied burp and kerplunk that got the bears all wet, the frog abandoned ship for another part of the pond. Blueberry's relief soon gave way to despair when Berry informed her that they were marooned. They could have paddled back to the end of the pond from which they had come, but it was in that direction that the frog had gone. They could see it now, sitting on the shore and burping rudely right at them, daring them, they thought, to paddle just a little bit closer. In fact, the frog was feeling sorry for the dear things in their plight, and was croaking to itself sadly, "They're sweet, they're sweet." The bears could not be blamed if it sounded to them as if the frog were saying, "Bear meat, bear meat." So the bears drifted aimlessly on their lily pad in mid-pond, and Blueberry's nose got stufflier, and Berry-Bud's salt pool threatened to overrun his furry cheek like a tidal wave. Their situation was very serious. No one could rescue them if no one knew where they were, and they could not make their squeaky voices carry far enough to wake their mistress. They could not swim, and they did not have a magic carpet like those on which heroes in storybooks often make their escape. They did not have any 7-league boots. They did not even have any bedroom slippers, for the carpet in their nursery was so snugly that they did not need any. They did not have a winged horse for a friend. They did not have a fairy godmother. The thought of a fairy godmother reminded Blueberry of what Berry had read to her out of their mistress's Bible. "Berry," she said tentatively, "if God made the bears, then maybe He knows we're out here and will send someone to help us." The same thought had just occurred to Berry-Bud, and he was in the middle of a conversation on the subject with St. Elmo, the patron saint of sailors. However, as you may have noticed, Berry liked to sound as if he knew more about things than Blueberry, and so he pretended to be skeptical. "I don't know, Blueberry. We're awfully small, and he is awfully big." "That must mean he has awfully big eyes and can see everything," reasoned Blueberry. "It can't hurt to ask him to rescue us, can it?" "I suppose not," agreed Berry-Bud, and began to fold his paws for prayer. At that moment, a face the size of a sunflower blossom appeared in the air just above their heads. It was only a face with no body attached, like the Cheshire Cat's grin in Alice in Wonderland. The face, though, was the face of a bear, with a harlequin's collar where its neck should have been, and a 2-pointed jester's cap on its head. The bear face wore a jolly grin, and when he spoke, the bells on his cap merrily jingled. "Are you the bears that want rescuing?" asked the jester bear happily. "Berry-Bud," whispered Blueberry in a trembly voice. "Is that—" "Ho, ho, ho, of course not," chuckled the jester bear. "I'm no one nearly that important. I'm only your guardian angel. I know you two pretty well, but since I'm usually invisible, you don't notice me. How do you do?" He jingled again. "Our guardian angel," breathed Blueberry in wonder, but she could not help adding, "You don't look very much like a real angel." "And you don't look very much like a real bear," retorted the angel good-humoredly. "Too short, too cute." "Actually," said the bear, "in my proper clothes, I really look quite real. I only appear this way to little bears so as not to frighten them." He jingled. It was true. One simply could not be scared of someone who was always ting-a-ling-a-linging. "Where's the rest of you?" asked Blueberry. "The rest of me? Ah, yes. Well, it would be too technical to explain just where the rest of me is. I'm not always sure I exactly understand that myself," the angel confided. "The closest I can come is to say that the rest of me is somewhere in the 4th dimension." "The 4th dimension? What's the began Blueberry. Blueberry is not scientific, said Berry Bud with a superior smile. But look here, mate, he continued in a voice that was meant to sound stern and commanding. How do we know you're our guardian angel? We hadn't even finished praying yet. When doesn't matter. Where doesn't matter. How doesn't matter. The angel began patiently to explain. Blueberry interrupted him. Don't argue, Berry Bud, she insisted with a stamp of her paw. He's here and he's going to rescue us. He's going to fly us all the way to next door. Aren't you, sir? Well, actually, the bear answered sheepishly, the truth is that my wings are back in the fourth dimension, and it is such a lot of trouble to squeeze them out. I had thought of recruiting a bird instead. What kind of bird would you like? I can bring you a raven, or a robin redbreast, or a kingfisher, or a cockatoo, or a pelican, or a pterodactyl, or a bustard, or a vampire bat. What's a bustard? Wondered Blueberry. A seabird, please, requested Berry Bud politely. A seabird? But of course, my little foretopman. Or is it Captain Bud? An albatross will do, perhaps? Then let me summon one. The bear face began to gyrate wildly, doing pirouettes and loop-the-loops, and making a jingling noisier than all of Santa's sleigh bells. Then suddenly the angel stood still and twitched his ears as if listening for something. From far away to the west and oceanward, the bears heard the cry of a solitary bird. The cry grew louder and nearer. Looking up, they saw a lovely white-feathered albatross descending to them in graceful spirals. It landed with a splash on the same lily pad that had housed the monster frog, who was watching the present proceedings with intense interest. The frog ribbited with joy that its prayer for the bears had been answered. Berry Bud climbed onto the albatross's back and helped Blueberry up behind him. Fly then to next door, the angel said to the bird, and returned him to the house before sunrise. Remember, said the angel to the bears, have fun with your cousins, but be good while you're having it, and if you need me, don't hesitate to jingle. He did just that, and then his face began slowly to turn invisible from the neck up. Don't leave us, please don't, begged Blueberry. The angel face appeared again as far as his mouth. I'll still be with you, only in a fourth-dimensional sort of way. Quit worrying, little bear, and be happy. With one last ting, the angel vanished completely. The albatross took to its wings and flew over the mistress's garden gate into the garden next door. It lighted momentarily on a sundial, then took off again, and before Berry could announce, "Land ho!" the bird sat down on the sill of an open window of the grandmamma's white and blue-trimmed cottage. Berry and Blueberry dismounted. The albatross cocked its cheerful head at them and winked its bright eye. Have fun, it chirped, but be back on the sill before sunrise." Then with a whoosh of its wings that nearly blew the bears over, it disappeared into the dark. The bears peered into the moon-enchanted room before them to see what they could see. Directly below the windowsill was a headboard beautifully carved with cherry blossoms, and from below that came the sound of gentle snoring. Blueberry and Berry climbed down the headboard and landed softly on a goose-feather pillow. On the pillow beside them, looking very sweet and good and very like a fairy godmother, was the face of their grandmamma. The bears lovingly patted her cheek with their chilly paws, which caused the grandmamma to dream that someone was tickling her with a snowflake. The bears then slid down the silky comforter, and having made sure that the grandmamma's bears were not bedroom-dwelling bears like themselves, they marched across the oriental rug and through a crack in the door. They wandered down the long, long hall, gazing up at huge, mysterious doorways into who knew what on every side. As thrilling as it was being next door where they had longed to be for ever so long, the strangeness and shadowiness of the house made them the teeniest bit nervous. They wished very hard that they would soon find their cousins. They wandered into the bathroom and looked into the old-fashioned tub, but no cousins. They wandered into the kitchen and ran all over the marble tabletop on which their grandmamma made bread, and they checked behind the flour tin and the rolling pin, but no cousins. They wandered into the parlor, and at once began to hear a psst, psst, ominous hissing sound. "Snakes!" Blueberry exclaimed Berry in alarm, but then the hissing was followed by a chorus of a dozen voices excitedly squealing, "Up here! Up here!" The bears looked up. On a high shelf, in an old Chinese cabinet as magically protective as the dome of their own nursery, there stood 12 2 5/8 inch tall bears, all in a row. "Come on, Blueberry, push!" said Berry Bud, and began to strain and sweat and heave-ho at the cabinet door. Blueberry joined him in straining and heave-hoing, but refrained from sweating because she did not think it ladylike. They pushed and pushed, and the door creaked ever so slightly on its hinges, but for all their valiant effort it wouldn't budge. They stepped back from the cabinet, panting breathlessly and wondering what to do. To their amazement, the door graciously glided open of its own accord. "Our guardian angel," nodded Blueberry knowingly. And then, with a commotion of scrambling and clamoring and a dozen voices of "Hooray!" the cousins somersaulted and leapfrogged and dove headlong from shelf to shelf to the ground. First came Chrysoberyl, a circus bear in a pink and green clown suit, holding a paw full of balloons and balancing on a ball. Then came Running Bear, a bear Indian in war paint riding a palomino, and Abigail, a pioneer bear in a calico bonnet, who drove a covered wagon. They were followed by Lulla Bear in red and white striped pajamas and a nightcap, and Winter Wonder Bear wearing a ski cap and sweater and riding on a sled. Next came the Baron and Baroness von Hohenschwabe, very sophisticated German bears dressed in burgundy velvet. They drove a white Mercedes convertible, and the Baroness wore a mink boa around her neck, which kept blowing in her face from the wind of the convertible's speed and making her sneeze. There came Bear White, a very innocent bear dressed in a lace christening gown. She was accompanied by two bears in wedding clothes, the dapper bear groom and his bashful bride, My Bear Lady. Last of all, and most joyfully for Berry and Blueberry, came the twins, Captain Bear, who looked exactly like Berry Bud except for more sea-ruffled whiskers, and Holly Berry, who looked like Blueberry except that around her neck she wore a glistening golden cross. The twin she-bears kissed each other, and the twin he-bears shook paws, and then all the bears began hugging and jumping up and down and dancing round and behaving without any dignity whatsoever. There was a great deal of discussion about what kind of adventure they should have, since sunrise was only a few short hours away, and at last all 14 of them agreed on a plan. I won't tell you what the plan was, or just what sort of adventure the bears had, but you can probably guess what they did by thinking of what you would like to do if you were let loose in an interesting place with no one to spoil the fun. Of course, Blueberry and Berry Bud had already let loose in their own house that night and gave some experienced suggestions. Berry Bud and Captain Bear did play at being pirates, and Captain Bear pretended to hang Berry at the yardarm. It was not a very serious hanging for Berry, since it was only from his ankle. Hollyberry let Blueberry try on her pretty gold cross. Beyond this, I will only say that whatever the bears did, they remained very good bears, and if they made any messes, they were sure to clean them up. The adventure ended with a trip to the kitchen, or the galley, as Berry Bud called it, where they celebrated their togetherness with a feast. You may think that it was not nice of the bears to eat the grandmamma's food without her permission, but you must remember how little these bears could eat. Blueberry, for example, ate a whole blueberry and felt sure that her stomach would feel stuffed forever and ever after. Another bear ate an entire curd of cottage cheese, and another a plump raisin, and another a deliciously salty peanut. The grandmamma never missed the food, nor would she have minded if she had. Just as the bears were finishing their feast, the grandmamma's grandpapa clock bonged 4. It was summer, and the sun came early, and the bears knew that it was time for the cousins to climb back into their cabinet shelf and for Blueberry and Berry Bud to go. The bears hugged and kissed and shook paws good-bye, and a few of them got stuffy noses, but they felt sure that whoever had arranged their adventure would let them have another one before too long. The cousins returned to their shelf, and the cabinet door magically closed. They waved at Berry and Blueberry, calling, "Farewell, farewell! Cuddle your mistress for us. Have a good flight home." Blueberry and Berry Bud waved to the cousins, then they hiked through the hallway back to their grandmamma's bedroom. They hurried in the crack and over the rug and up the comforter and kissed the grandmamma's nose, which made her dream of pepper. They climbed the headboard and reached the windowsill just as the albatross arrived to take them home. They mounted the bird, looked in toward their cousins, then looked out and up to the stars, which seemed now to have grown dim. Though their adventure had been more marvelous than the bears had words to tell, they felt that it had not been quite complete. The voice that had called them next door still bade them on, but to where and for what they did not understand. The albatross was just preparing to take wing when another airborne creature landed, not quite gracefully, on the windowsill beside them. It was their guardian angel, but this time it was all of him. I will leave you to imagine what a bear looks like when his lumbering body has delicate wings the color of the gold leaf background in a medieval painting. Very strange and, truth to tell, rather silly. At least this is what Blueberry and Berry thought, but they were too polite to say so. Besides, they knew that if they saw what the angel really looked like, they would think him too scarily majestic. If his present appearance was silly, it was silly in a very comforting sort of way. "Are you ready for a ride?" asked the angel cheerily, keeping his jingling very soft so as not to wake the grandmamma. Berry and Blueberry looked at each other in speechless happiness. With a miniature bear-style "thank you" to the albatross, they scrambled off its back and onto the back of the angel. They were high in the air before they could bid "next door" good-bye. The angel soared higher and yet higher. Blueberry clung to his fur and shut tight her eyes, opened them again, looked below her, and discovered that she was not one bit afraid. She looked above her and thought for a moment that they were bound for the moon. The man in its face seemed so close. But all at once the angel stopped rising and turned westward, and with a rocket rush of breathtaking speed he carried the bears past the Cornish cliffs and the rumbling breakers and out over the sea. Black as a starless night and wide as the universe it rolled beneath them. The sound of the waves was terrible and cold. They had yearned oh so strongly to see the sea. Its smell had beckoned them with a heartbreaking enchantment. Now they saw it, and it seemed to them a sight not meant for bears or even for angels, but only for someone wider than all the seas and whiter than all the stars that have ever burned. Blueberry did not want to tell Berry that she did not like the sea much, because he was always talking about it and calling it his mistress, though he admitted it was not nearly so cozy as their mistress at home. And Berry felt ashamed, because now that he saw the sea wide awake, and not just in brave bear dreams, he did not like it much either. "I want to go home, Berry," whispered Blueberry. She wondered why the angel bear had brought them. Suddenly the stars, which had faded nearly away, exploded into light. A red one burst open and poured forth its brilliant heart rays, and then a green one, and then a purple, then silver, then blue, then gold. The stars glowed brighter and brighter, so bright that it hurt the bear's eyes to gaze at them. They glittered like a sunken ship's treasure chest of jewels, like sapphires and rubies, thought Blueberry, though Berry Bud thought they were like carbuncles and aquamarines. "What's a carbuncle?" asked Blueberry. "You ask too many questions," scolded Berry impatiently. He had been comparing the stars to the ones he had, supposedly, seen in the South Seas, very poetically, he thought, and he was annoyed with Blueberry for interrupting him. Now Berry Bud was generally very nice to Blueberry, but he did have a habit of acting as if he was quite smart and that she was a little stupid. He should have realized that this would not so much make her admire him as hurt her feelings, but he didn't. His last remark was more than poor Blueberry could bear. "I'd rather ask questions than pretend I know all the answers when I don't," she stammered and burst into tears. Berry felt every bit as horrible as Blueberry had tried to make him feel in saying this. "She's right. I'm a cruel, conceited bear, I am. They should hang me at the yardarm, from the neck this time. I'm as worthless as a rack of seaweed. They should make me walk the plank. They should keel-haul me. They should—" The angel for about 1 second turned completely upside down. The bear shrieked, and only just kept from letting go and falling down, down, deep into the dark ocean below. It was the angel's subtle way of telling them both to apologize. "I'm sorry, Berry," said Blueberry, drying her tears and hugging him. "I wish I knew as much as you. You are awfully smart, awfully." "No, Blueberry," Berry insisted humbly. "You're a lot wiser and better. I promise I'll never say—" Then both the bear's apologies broke off, and the angel swooped down until the tips of his burnished wings skimmed the surface of the sea. The bears gazed into the kingly, roaring water and were filled with joy. The sea was no longer terrible, but blazed with the perfect beauty of the fiery stars. Creatures of the deep swam up to greet them, not only the tame ones, but the wild sea serpents, the krakens and sharks and whales and mermaids and men and sweet sirens. And none of the creatures were dreadful, for each held a lamp of jeweled starlight in a different rainbow color. "God made them too, Berry," whispered Blueberry, and hugged him tighter, and he squeezed her hand. "I wish our cousins could see this," he said. "I know your cousin's guardian angel well, and shall recommend it," the voice of their pilot rushed back to them on the wind. He soared once more so close to the stars that the bear's tiny hearts seemed to be made all of light. Then, too quickly for them to notice the distance between, they were home, and on the mistress's dresser beside their nursery. Still hugging each other, they smiled up at the angel gesture bear face hovering above them. The rest of them had returned to the fourth dimension. They thought that they could finally palely glimpse the real angel halo. They wanted to say thank you,
But thank you did not seem nearly enough to say to an angel, especially one with a halo who has just shown you the wonder of the universe, and they were too bursting with starlit happiness to say a word. The angel understood. Goodbye, little bears, though you know now that I'm not really leaving you. Be joyful for the blessings of the bears for always and always. Jingling, he faded from sight before the light of the rising sun. But even as the angel blended into sunlight, another light beamed back from the bedroom along the trail of the dawn. It seemed almost to Blueberry and Berry Bud as if it was coming from their own hearts, from the starfire welling up and overflowing. But this light was brighter than any of those, though the Bible on their mistress's desk had told them that there was once a star nearly as bright. The bears watched the light as it streamed through the open window and retreated into heaven, and they knew whose voice had called them on their journey to next door, to the love of their cousins and to the sea and the stars. They stumbled up the 2 steps to their nursery and fell upon their faces in adoration. When at last they looked up again, the light was gone. Yet maybe, like the angel, it remained with them in a way not visible to bare eyes. They climbed into their cradle and tucked their toy teddy in between them. Having been wet more than once that night, Blueberry had been beginning to get a genuine stuffly nose, or stuffly doze, as she pronounced it. But the light had taken the stuffliness away with it. We forgot to say our prayers, Berry Bud, Blueberry reminded him. Thank you for the blessing of bears for always and always. Amen, prayed Berry. He yawned sleepily but joyfully and snuggled down deeper under the covers. Blueberry kissed him and closed her eyes. Just then they heard the rustle of sheets and blankets from their mistress's bed, and, opening their eyes again, they saw her rise up like a princess in her flowing white nightdress and look out of the window. What a glorious sunrise, she said, and the bears felt sure she must be seeing some of the other light mingled with the dawns. The mistress walked to her dresser and bid the bears good morning. Good gracious, she exclaimed in concern. Did I leave your dome off, you darlings? I hope that you've not had nightmares. She reached toward them with the intent of rousing them up to play on their slide and their unicorn on wheels. The bears were just wondering if they could somehow pretend to be playing while they were actually snoozing. It had been a very busy night. When their mistress bent her princess face down to them and looked at them closer. Why, I believe you must have had bad dreams, she observed, or good ones that were too terribly exciting. I declare that you still look as sleepy as when I put you to bed. Perhaps I'd better leave you in your cradle a little longer. This afternoon will be soon enough for playing. She touched her finger to her lips and then to each bear's mouth, and she put the magical dome back over the nursery. After giving Blueberry and Berry Bud one curious glance, as if she half guessed at their adventure, the mistress left the tiny bedroom in the tiny cottage in Cornwall by the sea and closed the door behind her. Before the door was fully shut, the bears were asleep. They dreamt of their dozen cousins next door, and their guardian angel, and the creatures of the sea, and the colors of the stars, and they dreamt of a bright, bright light. Nightmares tip-tapped upon the dome with their claws and tickled it with their nasty, slimy fingers. But of course they could not get in. End.